Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Good morning, and welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and thanks for tuning in. We're going to continue where we left off yesterday in this most revealing book, The Global Vatican, by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. You can get this book from Roman and Littlefield. I highly recommend the book. It is an expose. In some respects, truth-telling. Describing how the Vatican controls both foreign and domestic policy for the United States. Essentially, America has become a Catholic country with little or no protest from the historic Protestants of America. And the future does not bode well for God's people in this country. On top of all the godlessness and lawlessness and revelry and debauchery and crime, and a general anti-Christ attitude in this country, we have the papacy, the man of sin, the son of perdition, now dictating foreign and domestic policy for the United States, and literally using the United States as its right arm in battle to conquer the rest of the world for the Pope. It's a hideous reality. And I hope and pray that my listeners are inspired to get a copy of this book and read it for themselves and share it with others, and to share with them the audio recordings of this series. I know it's becoming rather lengthy, many times repetitious, but it's vitally important. And it's time for God's people to fill their lamps with oil and prepare for what Antichrist has in store for this country, and make your allegiance with Christ. Now, we'll continue where we left off, retreating only one paragraph for continuity purposes. So on page 127, the last full paragraph, says, Pope Paul VI's visit to the United Nations did not prevent the escalation of the Vietnam War, which developed a momentum of its own. Remember, the papacy was behind the Vietnam War. It was the papacy that fomented the war with the help of her Jesuits through godless, quote-unquote, godless communism. They even achieved the cooperation of North Vietnam in allowing the CIA, Catholics in Action, to disperse Catholic propaganda in North Vietnam, claiming that Mary and Jesus, the baby Jesus, rejecting godless communism, had fled from North Vietnam to South Vietnam to take up residence in South Vietnam under the Roman Catholic dictatorship of Ngo Dinh Diem. And that prompted Roman Catholics of North Vietnam to flee, as though they were fleeing for their lives, to be with Mary and Jesus in South Vietnam. And this you can read for yourself in the book, Vietnam, Why Did We Go? By Averell Manhattan. And now, while the papacy, through the help of the Jesuits and the United States carrying on this papal proxy war in South Vietnam against a essentially cooperative North Vietnam, all under the guise of warring against communism, what it really was a war against the indigenous Buddhists of South Vietnam in an attempt to force Catholicism as the state religion in South Vietnam, and then to use South Vietnam as a beachhead to launch Catholicism all over Southeast Asia. That's the thesis of Averell Manhattan in his book, Vietnam, Why Did We Go? And Pope Paul VI at that time was coming to the United States to visit this once Protestant land. Having achieved the victory of all victories at Vatican Council II in 1965, the papacy thought that it was victorious and that he would be well received in the United States of America as the leader of the Christian world, honored by both Catholics and Protestants alike. Now that they're united after Vatican Council II, and he did. They even repaved the streets so the Pope wouldn't have to ride over any potholes in New York City. Allowed him to say an open-air mass in Yankee Stadium. The city was amazed, as though a god had visited. And when the Pope, as the popes do, made his speech at the United Nations, what did he pray for? Peace. As though he were the man of peace instead of the man of war that he is. And the whole world bought the lie. He says, Pope Paul VI's visit to the United Nations did not prevent the escalation of the Vietnam War. Why? Because it wasn't programmed to de-escalate the war in Vietnam. That was a papal crusade. The Pope got to make his little scene at the United Nations, give the world the impression that the papacy is the man of peace, while the war continued and escalated. He says, Pope Paul VI's visit to the United Nations did not prevent the escalation of the Vietnam War, which developed a momentum of its own. The Pope responded by stepping up his pursuit for peace. In 1966, he tried to get Ho Chi Minh, that is the president of North Vietnam, the communist president of North Vietnam, with whom the Vatican had secret negotiations with all along, I will add. He tried to get Ho Chi Minh, president of North Vietnam, to agree to peace talks with the United States, and even offered the Vatican as the venue. Right? How much better to portray the Pope as the global peacemaker if he has his North Vietnamese communist actors and his American actors and his Roman Catholic regime in South Vietnam all come to the Vatican to play out their act in the efforts to achieve peace, when peace was never the objective. Roman Catholicism for all Southeast Asia was the objective. But of course, this play had to be seen and heard by the American people to give the impression that this was really a war against communism, godlessness. Okay? And that the Pope was the center figure in all this peacemaking effort. So as better to camouflage and to cover and to cloak his future war-making efforts, which we are suffering right now. Okay? He offered the Vatican as the venue for this peace talks between his warring factions. At his urging, the United States suspended bombing of North Vietnam for more than a month. A good faith effort that backfired. Why? Because it was supposed to backfire. He says Hanoi used the break to mobilize troops and equipment for further assaults. That was the goal. Further killing in Southeast Asia. Further killing in Vietnam. All right? These were darkened days in the Johnson administration as American casualties mounted and anti-war rallies grew in size and vituperation. President Johnson and his advisors were desperate to end the war, says this author, and so believes the world, but do so without humiliation to the United States or calamity in South Vietnam. No, certainly we can't have calamity in South Vietnam, for heaven's sakes. We've gone to all this killing to get this South Vietnam, this Catholic country now, to prosper. We can't have any calamity in South Vietnam. That's the launching point for Catholicization of all Southeast Asia. And the United States surely will help. See? Now, on December 23rd, 1967, flying home from Australia. Wait a minute. I skipped a sentence here. President Johnson and his advisors were desperate to end the war, but do so without humiliation to the United States or calamity in South Vietnam. With options few and dwindling, they turned to the Pope for help. How convenient. The man of peace. We're going to seek peace from the man of peace. Okay, and on December 23rd, 1967, flying home from Australia, and a quick visit to American troops in Vietnam, Johnson landed unannounced in Rome. Okay, remember, there was still a separation of church and state and a non-establishment clause in the Constitution. You still had a few Protestants here and there were a little bit leery about the presidents of the United States meeting secretly or openly with the man of sin. So Johnson, on another trip, just made a last-minute decision to stop in Rome on the way home. A meeting with Pope Paul, that's Pope Paul VI, had been hastily arranged. That means without informing the American public. And it says many of Johnson's own advisors, including Johnson's chief logistical aide, were not informed until they were in the air, which is an open demonstration of Lyndon Johnson's efforts to keep his visit to the papacy out of the press. This, for all intents and purposes, is treason, in my view. This is treason. High crimes and misdemeanors, especially if you regard the papacy as the Antichrist, as I do. Now, it was well into the evening when Air Force One touched down at Rome's Ciampino Naval Airport. After a quick formal call on the Italian president and prime minister, obviously, courtesy but to give cover for his visit to the Pope, the president flew by helicopter to the Vatican. Okay, not through the streets, over the city in a helicopter, and most likely an Italian helicopter, and if an American helicopter, it certainly would have been a way to minimize the president's exposure, public exposure, as having visited the papacy until it had long occurred. All right. The helicopter saved time, it says, and embarrassment by allowing Johnson to leapfrog war protesters flooding the streets in Rome. As if things weren't difficult enough for the Johnson presidency, the president's helicopter began to sink in a patch of soft ground the moment it landed at the Vatican Gardens. Can't you just see the divine hand in that? Johnson lands in the Vatican Gardens, and his helicopter begins to be swallowed up by the earth. Kind of reminiscent of another biblical story, right? And it says, while the president met inside the apostolic palace with the Pope, the helicopter was extracted and flown to higher elevation. That's right. You can't get much lower than the man of sin, right? Now it says Johnson's visit to Pope Paul VI had been characterized in one history recording as disastrous. Okay, disastrous is how it was recalled by one historian. And it says a contemporary account in Time magazine described the Pope slamming his hand down in anger at Johnson. Why do you suppose the Pope slammed his hand down in anger? Because Johnson wanted to de-escalate the war. The Pope's crusader in the United States of America was under tremendous political pressure from the horrors that were revealed in Vietnam by the persecution of the Buddhists monks, the Buddhist priests lighting themselves on fire. The United States was seeing with their own eyes the Roman Catholic persecution of the Buddhists. And if too much was said and too much was seen in the United States about why these Buddhist monks were immolating themselves on television, Rome's cover might be blown. At least the presidency of the United States would be under tremendous criticism. They were on the verge of waking up the Protestants. Okay? Johnson wants out. The war is expensive. He's under tremendous pressure to achieve peace, but he's the Pope's crusader. And the Pope wants him to continue the crusade. Southeast Asia is not yet won for the Pope. Because at one point, the Pope, the man of sin, slams down his hand upon the desk in a confrontational discussion with Crusader Johnson. Now he says, the author says, if such dramatics took place, they are missing from the transcript drafted by the president's aide, Jack Valenti, a Roman Catholic who was present at the meeting. Johnson is described as considerate but pushy, while Pope Paul VI is sympathetic but firm. I'm sorry America has to suffer so much in this crusade. So many people have died and so many billions of dollars have been poured into the war. But it's all for the good of the church. Sympathetic but firm. See? It's all good for the church. It's all good for Catholicism. We're spreading the truth. Roman Catholicism in Southeast Asia. See, it's not an evangelical church. It's a crusading church, a militant church. You're not converted to Roman Catholicism by studying the Scripture. You're converted to Catholicism by force, by Roman Catholic overthrow of the government and then subjugation of all non-Catholic faiths. The Pope wanted to continue the crusade. Kennedy wanted out as gracefully as he could without exposing the papacy as the instigator of this war. Now, unlike many visits between presidents and popes, which usually include a measure of ceremony and publicity, this one was all business from the start. In other words, it was secret. As clandestine as it could possibly be. Sitting down just before 9 p.m., Johnson started by assuring the Pope that he wanted peace in Vietnam. Great theater, right? He had two specific requests for the Pope. One was for the Vatican to send a representative to American prisoners in North Vietnam. Why did Johnson require that? Because he knew the Vatican had open and clandestine communications with the North Vietnamese. After all, he got the North to cooperate with propagandizing North Vietnamese Catholics so that they would flee to the South. Okay? He was asking the Vatican to send a representative to American prisoners in North Vietnam in hopes of obtaining more humane treatment for American POWs. And it says clearly the main reason for the visit, says the author, was to enlist the Pope's help in getting the South Vietnamese government and the communist Viet Cong to sit for informal talks without the interference of North Vietnam and the United States. The Pope had his own agenda in the meeting, as one might rightly expect. He wanted Johnson to halt the bombing in North Vietnam. Sound like a peace effort, right? But as turned out, every time the United States stopped bombing the North just rearmed. It strengthened the North. Okay? The Pope wasn't done with the killing. The Pope wanted the crusade to continue. And the best way to keep the killing going was to force Johnson to stop the bombing. Okay? And all the while appear to be the peacemaker. You see how this works? Magnificent deception. How in the world could he deceive the whole world if he were not able to perpetrate incalculable deception? That's it. The Pope had his own agenda at the meeting. He wanted Johnson to halt the bombing of North Vietnam. Quote, "The Church cannot give its approval to bombing as a means of defending liberty," he offered to help. Quote, "Can I be an intermediary for you? I could say that I know that what the United States is saying is true, that it truly wants peace. Can you give me your assurance on this?" Unquote. Can't you just see all the cameramen and all the recorders going, catching the Pope, saying how he will be a mediator in these peace talks while the war rages on? The Pope's always got one hand under the table, and that's the hand that does all the work. The hand that's on the top of the table is used to make him appear to be the peacemaker in all this. Okay, one hand under the table. He says the Pope had his own agenda in the meeting. He wanted Johnson to halt the bombing in North Vietnam, and he said the Church cannot give its approval to bombing as a means of defending liberty. What was the history of the Roman Catholic Church? Of course, they didn't use bombs. They used the next best thing. Burning stakes. Torture apparatuses that were perfected over 6 centuries. Coercion, torture, persecution of the saints by the most sophisticated means they could devise. All forgotten history today. That's why they believe that the Pope really is a peacemaker. They don't understand his history. It's been removed from the libraries. It's been removed from the church libraries, from the school libraries. It's been long since shuffled under the rug, so you forget. So that the Pope can continue his diabolical slaughters all over this world, and you'll still believe he's a peacemaker. The Pope offered help. Can I be an intermediary for you? I can say that I know that what the United States is saying is true, that it truly wants peace. Can you give me your assurance of this? Unquote. And all the cameras are just clicking away. And that's what gets in the newspapers. Nothing is said about the clandestine, under-the-table dealings of the papacy, all the while to keep the crusade going. Keep the killing going. Yes, my man in Washington, Johnson, is suffering, but he's expendable. It's all for the good of the church. Okay? Johnson reminded the Pope that every time he had halted the bombing in the past, North Vietnam used the pause to its tactical advantage. Quote, "We have stopped bombing 5 times, but this only increases the murder." Unquote. There's the confession right there with his own lips. We have stopped the bombing 5 times at Vatican request, but this only increases the murder. The crusade was extended. The killing became more efficient. The United States, in stopping the bombing, was cooperating with the Vatican. Johnson was a crusader. He wasn't an American, he was a papist. Are you getting it? God, I hope and pray God's people are beginning to comprehend how the man of sin operates in this country and how he uses this country as a battle axe to conquer the rest of the world. We'll be back right after these messages. Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And if you'd like to contact me directly with comments or questions or suggestions, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. That's tom@seawaves.us. Just like the waves of the sea. Not tossed like the waves of the sea, not to and fro, but solid as an oak tree. Unbendable. Tom. Yes.
Oh, this is Nicholas. Hey, I was wondering if you would like to join me for the first hour of my broadcast next hour.
Certainly.
Okay, well, now everyone knows. So okay. Hang on and come back after the news.
All righty, very well. Nicholas is going to sideswipe me again. Everybody stay tuned. I'll see you in about a half an hour. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you a quote here from Pope Paul VI. And it's going to be very revealing. And I want you to listen very carefully. This is Pope Paul VI speaking to President Johnson. This is the commander-in-chief of the world. This is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. The commander-in-chief of these crusaders, and he's talking to one of his general officers in this crusade, President Johnson. That's the context that I want you to hear this quote. If you accept, as I insist, that the papacy governs the kings of the world and they do his bidding militarily all over the world to conquer the rest of the world for the Pope, and that that Vietnam was a current area of crusade, and that it was Johnson who was leading this crusade while pretending to pray for peace under tremendous pressure by the people of the United States. Listen to what the commander-in-chief says to one of his general officers in the crusade. Quote, "I believe it important for you to give new aspects to this war, to make it a more defensive war instead of an offensive war," unquote, said the Pope. Quote, "It will strengthen your moral position in the world," unquote. Now remember, this is the the chief executive officer. This is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. This is the commander-in-chief of the Crusader and general officer, Lyndon Johnson, telling Johnson to give a new aspect to the war. It looks like too offensive a war. You must make it look like a more defensive war to save your public perception in the world, to raise your moral position in the world. Why was the Pope considered or worried about Johnson's moral position in the world? Well, because the Pope was seen as the Prince of Peace in the whole conflict. The commander-in-chief was seen as a peacemaker. The commander-in-chief of the crusade in Vietnam was seen around the world as a peacemaker. And he's telling Johnson, you're left carrying the baggage. You look like an offensive warrior. I want you to make it look more defensive. So what was the war? It was an offensive war. And it was starting to look that way. And that baggage might even come home to roost at the Vatican. President Johnson's visit to the Pope had the potential to get some of the mud off of Johnson and onto the Pope. And the Pope wanted to maintain his peacemaker foreign relations image. It was indeed an offensive war, as are all crusades, an offensive war. And it wasn't against communism. It was against Buddhism. A presidency under the constriction of the Constitution that says there be no establishment of religion in this country, and a separation of church and state. And if you're going to use a nation, a Protestant nation, with that kind of a constitution, you have to conduct your crusades under a non-religious pretense, a war against communism. It must indeed be an offensive war. You can't spread Roman Catholicism in a defensive war. And the Pope's worried about his public image. Worried that the negative image of Johnson might just splatter the Pope. There is so much truth in this quote, if you can just comprehend what's being said. The Pope says, I believe it important for you to give new aspects to this war, to make it a more defensive war instead of an offensive war, said the Pope. It will strengthen your moral position in the world. You talk about the pot calling the kettle black. That's why they call him the man of sin, the great deceiver in the world. Johnson returned again and again to his hope that Pope Paul VI could intervene in South Vietnam. He worked the Pope with a persistence familiar to Washington politicians who had been subjected to the quote-unquote Johnson treatment, as it was known in the halls of Congress. Quote, I hope the Pope will encourage them to talk, just as the Pope encouraged me, listen carefully, to pass my education bills. We're now spending $9 billion more on education, and the Pope can claim some responsibility for this, unquote. So here the Pope is admitting that here is the author admitting that the Pope is very much influencing the education system in this country. And you know darn well the Pope didn't want the government to just throw more money at education. It had an agenda. and what was being taught in the schools. Globalism. Not the Bible, not the gospel, not Christianity, and certainly not revealing to anybody in the public schools that the papacy is the Antichrist. You wonder why people are so dumbed down, children don't comprehend what's going on, and that they're more global in their thinking? Believing that God was inept and didn't provide enough oil, enough water, enough air for humanity, a world full of people to survive. That's the role of your public schools, and it's financed by the American government, who is prompted by the papacy. That's why there's no Protestantism in this school. Protestantism is destroyed in the schools. They're not taught to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. They're taught abortion. They're taught sustainable growth. Sustainable growth is just another way of saying God screwed up. There's too many people and not enough earth to sustain us. So where does faith go? Right out the door. And that's why the papacy is controlling and organizing the curriculum of the schools and using the governments to finance this new Antichrist agenda in the schools. And here Johnson's admitting that the education system was greased with $9 billion more money, and our children are getting stupider, biblically stupider. Rome controls the education. In Roman Catholic canon law, there's only one on the earth that's qualified to teach, and that's the Vicar of Christ. The Roman Catholic Church must believe that only the Pope can interpret Scripture and can teach what's important in this world. That's why all heads of education in every country in the world must take their curriculum from those who give it in the Pope's behalf. And this is why the schools teach that God did not create the heavens and the earth and all that in them is. And God called man to be fruitful and multiply on an earth that is not capable of sustaining him. Therefore, God is a fool, and you must rely upon the papacy for a solution to all your dilemmas. That, in essence, is what the school system is all about. To destroy faith in Christ and the biblical account of creation and the role of man in the world. The public school system has been completely destroyed. The dumbing down of the world. Listen again. This is Johnson speaking. There's a lot in this if you understand it. It says, quote, I hope the Pope will encourage them to talk, just as the Pope encouraged me to pass my education bills. Okay? It wasn't polite encouragement either. The commander-in-chief of all the kings in the earth doesn't negotiate. He dictates. Okay? And that's the way Johnson did, too. He just emulated his Holy Father in Rome. He was a dictator. He says, I hope the Pope will encourage them to talk just as he encouraged me to pass my education bills. Strong arm. Get them to the peace table or threaten to excommunicate them. Subject them to eternal damnation if they don't come to the peace talks. We got to stop this war. The Pope doesn't want to stop the war. He says we're now spending $9 billion more on education. And the Pope can claim some responsibility for this. He can claim all the responsibility. The American education system is formed around Roman Catholic canon law. You have to get the children to think in terms of canon law without their knowledge. And that's how it's done in the school system. And I could launch into another dissertation about how it's done in the churches too, but that would offend my listeners who love their churches and love their pastors. And I do more harm than good, they say. Anyway, he says, I think I can do something, said the Pope with a smile. You better believe. Quote, I don't want to press the point, said Johnson once more before the meeting ended, but I did want to know if I can assume that the Pope will try to bring the South Vietnamese to informal talks and will immediately help out the prisoner problem, unquote. Quote, I will do whatever is possible, said the Pope. Quote, this is a cause which is close to my heart, unquote. Oh, the man of sin, this is so close to my heart. You better believe it is. A heart made of stone. A heart made of death. A heart made of perdition. And you need to know it and to see it for yourself. The public theater that deceives the whole world should just bounce right off your forehead. When you see behind the curtain and who really constitute the players on the stage and what they really are behind the scenes, then all the theater that takes place in the news, all the theater that takes place on the internet and the newspapers just bounces right off your forehead, and you can see through all the deception and put the tail right on the donkey, to use a worn-out expression that doesn't say anything. You can know who the Antichrist is, who the man of sin is, who the son of perdition is, who the destroyer is. It's the papacy. And the whole world thinks he's the man of peace. No greater deception since the Garden of Eden. And we would not be so blind if it were not for futurism, the belief that the papacy is not the Antichrist, but is a single individual that comes at the very end of time that we don't even need to worry about because we're going to be raptured out of here. What Jesuit hogwash! He says, before they parted, the two men exchanged gifts. The Pope gave Johnson a 15th century painting. Johnson gave the Pope a package, which he then proceeded to open with a penknife. Inside the package was a bust of himself. No conceit left in the Johnson house. Lyndon Johnson got it all. But where did he get his conceitedness from? There's no greater conceit in all the world than his commander-in-chief in Rome, who calls himself the Vicar of Christ on earth. Now he says, I have not seen any records to indicate what the Pope did to encourage peace talks in South Vietnam. Because there aren't any. Without question, though, he was very helpful several months later in the spring of 1968 in nudging the North Vietnamese toward negotiations with the United States in Paris. Well, you know, he first offered all these negotiations to take place at the Vatican, but that was just too messy. So they moved it to Paris. And the commander-in-chief is offering his two generals in the crusade to get together for peace talks in Paris. We're going to have a great big theater set up in Paris. We're going to deceive the whole world. Thanks, boys, for the crusade. We didn't get everything we wanted, but we sure got Roman Catholicism into Southeast Asia. thanks to the North Vietnamese communists under the Jesuit control, and thanks for the American President John F. Kennedy and Johnson for cooperating. We benefited the church. See how it works? Now we got to cover our tracks in Paris. We can't let the world think too much. We have to guide their thinking. So we're going to have peace negotiations in Paris. And it says President Johnson, embittered and exhausted, had recently told the American people he didn't intend to seek the Democratic nomination for presidency for a second term, but he still wanted to end the war, and Pope Paul VI still wanted to help him do so. I think I said in the previous broadcast I was fresh out of bridges to sell on the moon, but the whole world buys the lies, man. They're a dime a dozen. Gobble, gobble, gobble. He said in late April of '68, President Johnson directed his aide Joseph A. Califano Jr., a Roman Catholic, to contact the apostolic delegate, that is the unofficial ambassador to the Vatican, to the United States, Archbishop Luigi Raimondi, to ask if the Pope would be willing to propose the Vatican as a site for the peace talks, as he had done in the past. On April 27th, the Vatican responded to Califano. The Pope would be pleased to issue an invitation to both the United States and the North Vietnamese. The peacemaker, enter the Pope, the great peacemaker, the great white North, man. Quote, "This is a beautiful message," unquote, said Johnson after reading the Pope's invitation. The invitation was also a clever diplomatic ploy, leveraging the quote-unquote soft power of the Holy See, as the President no doubt intended, and the Pope surely understood. They call it soft power. You know what makes it soft? The Pope doesn't have to do his own dirty bidding like he did in the Old World War. In the Old World Order, he's got so many cooperative people under his aid, under his direction now, that he can stand back, aloof and high above the fray, and calling peace while under the scenes he is controlling the war. There's your soft power. That's the great theater of the world that deceives the whole world. Soft power is a lie. Soft power is theater. Soft power is the deception. Soft power was behind Vatican Council II, which was not an invitation for the Protestants to come back to the Roman Catholic Church, to seek Christian peace and unity. It was an ultimatum. We now control the United States government, and if you don't come back, if you don't cooperate with the Roman Catholic Church, we can draw out the Inquisitions again. And the civil government will do our bidding, and we'll stand aloof and call for peace. That's soft power. It's just as bloody, if not more bloody, than the hard power of the Old World Order. He says, "This is a beautiful message," says Johnson after reading the Pope's invitation. The invitation was also a clever diplomatic ploy, leveraging soft power of the Holy See, as the President no doubt intended, and the Pope surely understood. Either North Vietnam agreed to participate in peace talks, or Washington could show the world that it was more willing than Hanoi to come to the table, giving the United States the moral high ground in the court of world opinion. Wasn't it the Pope worried about Johnson and America's moral standing in the world? So the Pope just simply gave Johnson an opportunity to elevate his moral authority in the world by making that invitation. See how it works? He said Washington could show the world that it was more willing than Hanoi to come to the table, giving the United States, that is President Johnson, the moral high ground in the court of world opinion. See, the presidents enjoy their world opinion, their reputations, to the Vatican. They're beholden to the Vatican to arrange things that after they have done all the Pope's bidding and heap to themselves condemnation in the process, the Pope can resurrect them at the very end. And that's what the Pope did for Johnson, his faithful crusader. And all he had to do was write an invitation for peace. And if Hanoi rejected it, then the United States won. He says less than 3 weeks later, on May 3rd, Hanoi agreed to negotiate. Predictably, the North Vietnamese preferred to hold talks in a secular location instead of the Vatican, obviously. They have to maintain the godlessness appearance of communism. So they have to move the venue from the Vatican. Otherwise, they blow their cover. You never want the world to know that communism was created by the Jesuits, is a creation of the Roman Catholic Church to provide the Hegelian dialectic in order to foment the wars through which to advance the papal's global agenda. Never should the world be privy to the fact that communism is a battle axe for the Pope, just as is democracy. That's the great deception. Blow the cover and the people's eyes are opened. So it's wise to move the peace talks to Paris, and it says, nevertheless, the Pope's invitation served its purpose. The Paris peace talks were long in coming and would be even longer in producing a truce, but they were a start that would have been delayed without the Pope. There's your great peacemaker. When in fact the entire crusade, Johnson and the North Vietnamese, were led by the papacy. Killing is the name of the Antichrist. We'll see you tomorrow on Inquisition Update. Stay tuned to First Amendment Radio, and we'll see what Nicholas has got on his mind this morning.